downfield.
Classic Game Time. The best games from the past season on YurView.
Welcome to another episode of Left Coast Sports with Jon Schaeffer. This week, I'm joined by Alicia Rodriguez of SB Nation. She is a wonderful voice on soccer. We'll discuss the westward expansion of the NWSl to San Diego and LA in 2022. The NWSL is the premier women's soccer league in the world, and the league hopes to capitalize off the sport's popularity in Southern California in this latest round of expansion. If you're a soccer fan, I think you'll enjoy the conversation as we cover expectations for the clubs, league growth plans, stadiums, and much, much more. But as always, before we get started with today's episode, please give us an auto download on your podcast platform so you'll get future episodes automatically. Left Coast Sports is on most podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, the free iHeartRadio app, YouTube, and Spotify. You can leave a review there as well. And while you're here and listening, please switch over to Twitter and follow me there, at Jon Schaeffer. That's JONSCHAEFFER, at Jon Schaeffer. The NWSL hopes to take Southern California by storm beginning in 2022. Here's my conversation with Alicia Rodriguez. So, Alicia, in your opinion, what makes San Diego such a good potential market for American soccer and specifically the NWSL?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first and foremost, San Diego has been a good provider of talent for the U.S. national teams over the years, men's and women's. And so there's a population that has been playing soccer since they were kids. San Diego typically tends to be one of the top markets for international soccer tournaments on television. So there's definitely a demand. And so I think in that regard, it makes complete sense to bring the NWSL to San Diego. Do
you think ultimately San Diego would be the type of market that the MLS would want to expand to as well?
Yeah, I think it's certainly possible. We've seen that MLS has been interested in San Diego over the years. And I think the big thing, obviously, is if the right stadium deal comes together. I definitely think MLS would be interested in coming to San Diego, but absent a good, strong, tangible stadium proposal, I think it's probably going to be a long shot. But as we know, things can change pretty quickly, and I think it's certainly possible. And I definitely think that MLS, for their part, keeps some interest in coming to San Diego at some point.
I want to get back to the NWSL, as you know, a franchise not just in San Diego in 2022, but also in Los Angeles. I mean, that seems important for the league to get two teams in Southern California and probably establish some type of rivalry. You would expect probably a pretty significant rivalry between those two clubs, right?
Yeah, definitely. I know for San Diego's perspective, they're going to be really amped against Los Angeles, and I think Los Angeles is probably going to be pretty big on this rivalry as well. I think it makes a lot of sense, like you said, to kind of establish a presence in a couple cities in Southern California. But I also think that it's natural, right? Like there's reasons that these teams are going to feed off each other. And I think the fact that they're launching in the same year as well is probably going to stoke those rivalry fires a little bit more. There's not going to be one team that has a big lead, having been in the league for 5 years before the other one. So they're going to be starting from the same point. And so it's going to be pretty interesting to see how each team develops their own identity, their own playing style, their own fan base, their own culture, and kind of how they feed off each other. And I think overall we've seen in other instances in American soccer where there's been two teams in the same market or pretty close to each other, that usually does help them get better because they're motivated by each other.
Alicia, is it realistic to expect that those two clubs or one of those two clubs could contend from year one, or what are the hurdles to contend from day one in the NWSL?
Yeah, anything's possible. It's a pretty small league, so I wouldn't say without having any roster for either the two California teams so far that they're definitely going to contend. But there are a couple teams at the top in the NWSL that have been perpetual contenders, namely North Carolina and Portland. So really you have to go through those teams first in order to have any real chance at contending. I think for teams that are coming into the league, we've seen that it's been a little bit of a struggle over the years. Orlando struggled for several years, and they've been pretty inconsistent over time since they entered the league. Same can be said for Houston, although they're coming off their best year ever last year. So they're on an upswing. And then this season, Kansas City returned to the league. They're struggling quite a bit, but they also moved to Kansas City kind of at the 11th hour. So I think a lot of people are giving them some leeway there. And Louisville, I think I really like Louisville's style of play. I think in a lot of ways they're performing a lot better than I expected them to, but they're not getting enough results. So, I don't really think that we can expect them to, make a push and be in the final this season. But I do think there's promising signs from Louisville. And so in that regard, I think that there's some reason for promise for the California teams when they're kind of looking at the landscape coming into the league.
I'm curious, for those that are not familiar with the NWSL but will be introduced to it in Southern California, what should they expect and what type of style of play will fans expect to see from these clubs?
I think there's some differences. I wouldn't necessarily say that there's one style of play, but I will say that given the fact that the league is overwhelmingly American, you're going to see a style of play that in many respects I think mirrors what the national team is doing. Obviously, most of the national team players are playing in the NWSL. But there's also some skill players from abroad as well. So, there's the likes of Debinha, an up-and-coming Brazilian star who plays for North Carolina. Obviously, Marta, one of the legends of the game, she plays for Orlando. Rachel Daly, she's at Houston Dash, and she's a really versatile player. But I think bringing her into an attacking role has been really good. But yeah, I think there's some variety, which for me as a soccer fan, I like to see tactical variety. You don't want to see 12 teams playing exactly the same way. But I also think that, it's a pretty physical league. Players who come from abroad, tend to need a little bit of an adjustment period. I would say the referees are pretty loose in terms of calling fouls and, yellow cards and whatnot. So basically, the players have to really be tough in addition to being fit. And, it can be pretty exciting at times.
What do you think it says about San Diego's commitment to win when they make hires like Jill Ellis as the president of the club and Casey Stoney was recently announced as the head coach as well? What does that say about San Diego and their interest in winning?
I think it's a great sign. Obviously, Jill Ellis, she's kind of hit the pinnacle of the women's game, and so coming in as an executive to the professional ranks, I think is really good for her. I think that this is a great opportunity, and I think hiring Casey Stoney is on paper seems like a home run. Casey Stoney came from Manchester United Women, led them to two consecutive fourth place finishes in the FAWSL in England. But she also helped launch that team. That team had been disbanded, and then she helped relaunch them. So she has some familiarity with launching a team, which I think will come in handy in this situation. She's never been in the United States. She's never played in the NWSL or predecessor leagues or anything like that. So there may be a bit of an adjustment, but I think all in all, it's a great hire. And I think having both of them to help launch the team is a wonderful statement of intent for San Diego's team. And I'm really excited to see what comes next, because I think that this helps set the table for, what's possible in building a strong team in year one.
Yeah, and San Diego has said that they do plan to develop and showcase female leadership, and obviously they've made that clear with these hires of Jill Ellis and Casey Stoney. How important is it to develop more females in terms of on the sidelines, leadership positions, across the sport in general?
I think it's pretty vital. It's a little bit of a thorny issue just because I think the default has been, you want the strongest candidate regardless of their gender in any given role, and that's totally understandable. For example, right now the women's national team manager is Vlatko Andonovski, a man, but I think he's the consensus pick for the best person for the job, and so it's not a controversial choice, whatsoever. Having said that, I think one of the problems has been we've seen as the NWSL has grown over time, more and more of the positions, particularly in coaching, but to an extent also in front office and executive positions, have been dominated by men. And, if you really want to grow the sport and you really want to develop the infrastructure at all levels, give women opportunities where they haven't had them before, I think it's really vital to provide those opportunities and provide ways for women to grow their skill sets, get training to be coaches and get their badges and whatnot. Just because, in the case of men, you can coach in men's soccer, you can coach in women's soccer, right? Like everything's open for you. We still see for women, there's virtually no participation for women in the men's game. And so if men are dominating women's soccer as well, then there's essentially, very few opportunities for women in general. And so I do think that we're at a moment in which there needs to be some more conscious work done to provide training opportunities and mentorship opportunities where necessary for women in all facets of the game, but then also keep an open mind and allow women to, take these important positions as well in order to develop the game and make it as robust and as strong as possible.
Yeah, that's extremely well said. And as you know, the Olympics are just days away. We'll have another World Cup obviously coming up here during this cycle. How critical is the success on that international level, Olympic success, World Cup success for the continued growth of the NWSL?
Yeah, I think it goes both ways. In the case of the success of the national team, that obviously provides huge boosts in terms of interest and media interest, eyeballs from fans, casuals who kind of want to check out what's going on in their backyards, between tournaments. It's really big. But I also think that it goes the other way as well. If the NWSL is strong, then that means they're producing good players who can play for the national team, giving them meaningful minutes on a regular basis. And then hopefully that keeps the national team program strong overall, because one of the things we've seen is that the United States was an early adopter in women's soccer, and so they got a head start that a lot of other countries have subsequently been playing catch up. Well, they're in many ways catching up, and so the United States needs to keep that edge. And they've been able to do it over the past decade in pretty impressive fashion. But at a certain point, more and more countries are going to catch up to the United States, and so they're going to need to have a really competitive league domestically in order to make sure the bar is set really high and make sure that the quality of play remains high so that the United States can remain competitive on the international stage.
Back to the NWSL for a moment. What type of crowds are typical for these matches? I look at San Diego. They're going to be housed in a 6,000-seat stadium, at least initially, Torero Stadium on the campus of the University of San Diego. LAFC will be the home stadium for the Angel City Club, which is a much larger venue, probably 20 or 25,000 seats. What's an ideal size for the stadiums in the NWSL?
That's a great question. I think it's something that the league is trying to address, and I think they've been doing a pretty good job over the last couple years in particular. At this stage, I think attendance really varies market to market, and obviously what's happened in 2020 and then slowly bringing back fans around different markets, it's hard to kind of peg what the current state is of attendance in the league, based on the pandemic and everything. But the high is in Portland. The Portland Thorns typically sell out Providence Park, which has, I think, roughly 20,000 capacity. So, they're the trendsetters. They're doing fantastic. Most other teams are in smaller venues or, their target at the moment is quite a bit smaller. I think we're at a point where teams are generally getting over 3,000, and they're working on bumping that up little by little. We saw, for example, the last couple of years with Sky Blue FC, which became Gotham FC. They started playing games at Red Bull Arena, which they were one of the teams that had one of the smallest attendances in a different venue over at Rutgers. They moved to Red Bull Arena, obviously a beautiful stadium, a big stadium by NWSL standards, and they were getting good crowds. They were getting 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 for these showcase games that they were doing. So I think that that's a great marker for what's possible. It's a slow process to build up the attendance, but I think that scenarios like that are showing that there is growth, and as long as we don't have another pandemic on the horizon, hopefully we do not. I think that it's reasonable for both San Diego to have a 6,000 capacity stadium for the time being. I think that is, I think Torero Stadium is a really nice, intimate setting for soccer, and I think it could lend itself to having really great crowds to support the team. But I also think that there's potential for Angel City to, move beyond that, hopefully pretty quickly, and kind of push the bar for other teams like San Diego down the road to want to have a bigger capacity so they can get more folks as well. But obviously we'll have to see what happens in 2022 because, it's difficult to project what the attendance is going to be, before we've even seen it.
You mentioned growth. Are the long-term plans of the NWSL to continue expansion? Will this one day be a league the size of the MLS in terms of the number of clubs, or what's realistic?
Yeah, I think they're definitely on track to do more expansion moving forward. I think at this point, the current commissioner that the league has, Lisa Baird, I think she's doing a good job in terms of checking out which markets are really viable and which ones have the ownership situation needed to, push the league forward. I expect that it's pretty likely we're going to see an expansion team, at least one expansion team in Canada, probably in the next 5 years, for example, which is necessary because the Canadian national team has been a vital part of the NWSL. It makes sense to have a pro team in Canada, part of the league, things like that. I don't know if they're going to necessarily get to MLS's level. I mean, MLS is kind of getting to the level where they're really well beyond the bounds of most top flight men's domestic leagues around the world. You don't see leagues that are as big as MLS in other countries. So I'm not sure if we're going to see 27, 30 teams in the NWSL, but will they get to 20? I think that's certainly possible. And I don't think they're going to rush to it. I think they're at the point in their history that they're going to do slow, deliberate growth. But I do expect the league to continue adding teams.
Well, it is an exciting time, certainly for the NWSL and for fans of women's soccer in Southern California, specifically in San Diego and Los Angeles. And Alicia, we appreciate you breaking it down for us and for your time today. That was great. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks again to Alicia for joining us today. And if you are a fan of soccer in this country, you'll want to give Alicia a follow on Twitter at Soccer Musings, at Soccer Musings. Also, this reminder, don't miss the best high school football games from this past season with Classic Game Time, Fridays on YurView. That's Classic Game Time this summer, only on YurView. If you haven't already, please subscribe, auto-download future episodes on whichever podcast platform you're listening to this podcast on right now. Please leave a review as well. And once again, please follow me on Twitter at Jon Schaeffer. That's JonSchaeffer at Jon Schaeffer. For previous episodes or more information about Left Coast Sports, you can visit YurView.com. That's YurView.com. YurView.com. As always, we thank you for listening, and we'll catch up next week right here on Left Coast Sports with Jon Schaeffer.